All right, so let me share my screen here.
Hmm.
All right, request. All right. All right. Can you guys see what I'm sharing?
It looks like a just a black screen, right? Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh,
There we go.
yeah.
Is this it? It's good?
Yeah.
Hmm.
All right, hold on here. All right, if I change, okay. You can see all that changes when I
Yeah, it's a little le oh, there we go.
a
Yeah.
little laggy, yeah. All right. So do we want to begin? We start or
Let's do it.
all right.
Is
All right.
everyone
Well, thanks for
ready?
coming. Thanks for coming, guys. I appreciate it. Nice to meet all of you briefly. So I'll introduce myself in a second. I guess I'll introduce the theme of kind of what I want to talk about over the next 55 minutes now is what is business ultimately for? Which might sound like a strange question. Maybe the answer seems obvious. Um, but I think it's actually a pretty complicated question. And I think if we just take this question seriously and unpack it, it leads us into or down the path towards ethics and thinking about business ethics and really the way I like to approach business ethics. All right. So, again, my name's Justin Nordin. I teach business ethics and sustainability at Loyola. I had the pleasure of having Odysseus in my class last fall. Seems like a long time already.
Yeah, seriously.
And so my background is not in business, it's in philosophy though. So I actually got my master's in philosophy at LMU and then my PhD at Loyola Chicago. Taught in Loyola Chicago, taught philosophy for several years, classes on ethics, classes on philosophy of personhood, various other classes. But always my research and my interest always brought me back to ethics. All right, I was interested in normative ethics, the question of what kind of principles are we bound to, or at least should we be bound to? Meta ethics, which is the question of like where does morality come from and how do moral terms acquire their meaning? And then applied ethics, which to me is not just taking data and applying a principle and then getting some kind of output, but really thinking through what it means to be human and live well, right? And so, as Odysseus knows, that's how I ground my course, right? People come into my course kind of expecting one thing, and maybe just discussing of rules or decision-making procedures, things like that. And I hope that I upset that expectation a little bit because I think there's more to ethics than that, right? I think ethics begins in really thinking through what it means to live here and now as human beings in this present moment. And I think philosophy specifically lets us indulge that desire to dig deeper, to go underneath the surface level and what's immediately apparent for the sake of understanding both ourselves and the world around us, right? It's that hefty pursuit of truth and critical thinking, always with an eye towards living well, towards being good human beings. And so that's how I approach my class, which gives it a little bit of a different feel than if you were probably taking this from someone who teaches um, who comes from a business background. So, like I said, the big question that drives my interest in research in business and beyond is what does it mean to live well in a world with a host of diverse others, both human and non-human, right? And counting the environment treated as another as well. And bringing that question into business is natural because business today is one of the most powerful sectors of society. And how businesses understand themselves, how they understand their purpose, what their values are, and how they understand their function within their communities shapes those communities, right? In many ways, immense ways. So, what I want to do in my research and my teaching is better understand how we can foster a more sustainable community with human and non-human others from both the individual perspective and the organizational, i.e., business perspective, right? And as a foundation for that, I ask how human beings in our turbo capitalist ultimate or excessively consumptive society, how we can overcome instrumental values and instrumental thinking. All right, so that's going to be part of what I want to talk about tonight is instrumental values and instrumental thinking. I'll unpack a little bit more about what I mean by that in just a little bit. But in general, I'm talking about means to ends thinking, right? So here's this, whatever, what can I do with it? How can I get something out of it? How can I produce something, consume something? I think we live in a culture that primarily views things instrumentally and sees value instrumentally in terms of what we can do with things in order to satisfy our more immediate wants and needs. Okay. So I think this is kind of definitive of our cultural moment. So what I want to ask is, how do we recollect vital values, right? Values that contribute to individual and collective flourishing to create a less socially and environmentally destructive economic system, right? So vital values, what's really important to us as human beings, what really matters, right? And so that's kind of my approach. But to kind of take a step back, I just want to ask some of you, when you think about, some of you maybe have classes in ethics or business ethics, maybe not. What do you think about when you think about business ethics or ethics in general? Like just what words, ideas, any associations that pop into your head? I'm not looking for anything technical or specific here, but just like what do you think of when you think of ethics? Yeah, Oscar?
Uh, I summarized it as reducing harmful side effects of shortcuts. So if businesses try to cut costs, even if that would make them more money, ethically, maybe they wouldn't. Uh, and I think also I like to think about the role of the consumer and how that influences companies, even in very capitalist societies like the US, to be forced to care about issues like diversity or the environment. But I'm not too well versed in this, so really
Okay.
interested to.
No, that's perfect. Okay, so you think about reducing harmful side effects of business. So business is doing its thing. There's going to be some harms that come from it, and ethics in part tries to reduce that. And you also use the word forced, which I like. So we need to make businesses do something different than the otherwise might do, because if we don't check them, they're going to make things possibly worse for some people anyway. Something like that. Okay, cool, perfect. Other anyone else kind of thoughts that came to your mind? Associations, whatever. Again, not asking for anything technical or specific, just what pops
Me,
into your head.
it was a lot more basic, but I just thought global warming
Okay.
when I think of this.
Okay. So why do you think global warming, like, how do you relate that to ethics?
Well, I feel like there's like we all kind of know that global warming is becoming an increasingly more important issue.
Yeah.
But I feel like because, and like we talked about this in class, because there's no one specific person that we're blaming, everyone's just kind of taking the blame off of themselves. And I think that's one ethical dilemma in business that's really important, that's really under talked about, undervalued, under discussed, just like, yeah.
Yeah. So again, it's a kind of a side effect of business. Business is doing this thing, and global warming happens, but it happens from a variety of actors, and it's hard to assign accountability. And so you think ethics has to come in to kind of fix that in some way.
Yeah, I think that having back to your original point where it's like having values or like a set of values. I feel like
Yeah.
if we all as a society could agree on this base set of values, then I feel like we can better tackle the issue, even if it's like an indirect, in an indirect way.
Yeah. What do you guys think about that? Like a base set of values, because we're going to talk a lot about values. So I'm glad you brought that up already, because I was just going to get to it in a minute. Um, what do you think about that when we talk about a base set of values? Do you think that's possible, realistic? Do you think there is such a set of values that we could agree on? We live in a culture that prizes individuality, and we tend to think that people just have their own values and do their own thing. And as long as they're not obviously hurting someone, they can do whatever they want. So where do you guys think about that in your experience? Does that seem feasible, realistic? Yeah, Oscar, you can just jump in. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I'm realizing that now, and I'll do that. But yeah, I think it's exactly as you said. Values are very subjective, and it's up to the individual as to what values they care about. So it definitely like I mean, yeah, like I would think that it's very hard to come up with more specific a specific set of values that businesses would be expected to follow.
So you think it might be difficult, given that when you say values are subjective, you're meaning relative to each individual?
Exactly. Like I think that people would. weigh values differently. So if you ask like everyone for what are the three values you care about the most, the list isn't going to be very one-sided and have a lot of I mean, I'm sure there will be like a big group of values that have more votes than others, but there isn't going to be clear winners,
Okay,
if
so you
that
think it'll be
makes
a variety.
sense.
Okay, yeah, perfect. Okay, so values, they're subjective. They speak to us as individuals, and the question is as well, is there some way to arrive at some kind of level, some sense of objectivity or hierarchy or something like that, despite the fact that they arise from our own individual experience? Okay, that's good. Okay, so we got reducing harmful side effects, things like global warming. Odysseus, remember we talked about in terms of tragedy of the commons in our class, where there's an incentive structure that actually doesn't incentivize people taking that extra cost to assume responsibility for like things like their pollution, and government can kind of try to come in and fix that, but there's a problem with that as well. And so this is where everyone acts out of their own self-interest, but ends up hurting everyone, including themselves in the long run. This is what climate change is an example of. Solomon or George, do you guys have any thoughts on just business ethics when you hear that word?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, well, like just going based off our current discussion, it almost seems like business is like inherently it has like it holds a conflict of interest with ethics, like doing the greatest good almost. And it feels like I guess just like going piggybacking off of what Oscar said, ethics is pretty individualized. And so at the end of the day, maybe like specifically for business, I could definitely see a world where, there are certain principles that are like collectively established to like reduce those harmful side effects. But at the end of the day, it's it's hard to say. Like, I don't know, it almost seems like you have to sort of collectively agree to like stunt your growth in terms of profit or whatever, because business and ethics sort of like clash against each other in my mind.
When you said ethics is individualized, what do you mean by that?
Sort of like everyone holds their own schools of thought for like what they think they should do in any given situation. So like everyone holds their own independent values.
Okay, so everyone has their own values and their own beliefs, maybe about what should occur in certain situations. So it's individualized in that sense. Okay, George,
Yeah.
you have
Yeah,
any thoughts?
yeah, I agree. I mean, I think when I think of ethics, I think of like doing the right thing. So like, yeah, just I mean, yeah, doing what you think is best without harming others in your business, and while also, I guess, maximizing your profits or like your best interests.
Okay,
Yeah.
so there's this kind of tension between your best interest and maximizing profits. Those might come into, or maybe maximizing profits is in your best interest, but ethics might tell you not to do that. And so there's going to
Yeah.
be this conflict between what ethics tells you to do and what you otherwise would want to do, or what's in your best interest. Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. So those are all really great things. And I guess the one thing I would note kind of as we move forward here is that in some sense, I think we're all conditioned to think this way. Like ethics is individualized. It's kind of what we think. We all have maybe our own code of ethics. At the same time, while there's some intuitive sense where that seems true, we can't also just leave it there, right? Because if ethics is just individualized in that way, then we run into all kinds of problems, right? Like if you agree to work for me and I say, okay, I'm going to pay you, $50 an hour or whatever it is, and then 2 weeks go by and you come to collect your paycheck and I say, based on my individual ethics or my own interest, I think I'm not going to pay you this time, right? So it also can't stay there, right? And so the question is, how do we get from this kind of individual focus on the self to something that is kind of more holistic and takes the other into consideration and isn't and doesn't stay at just this, well, I want this, therefore that's okay for me, right? Because if we stay there, we don't have ethics and we can't get anywhere. And ethics would be a worthwhile pursuit, and I wouldn't have spent so much time on it. But that's where a lot of people start. And so I think you guys touched on a lot of good points, right? So a lot of people come to my class with these idea about ethics, that it's individualized, there's this tension between our self-interest and what ethics demands of us, that ethics is about following rules, that business ethics is kind of more about decision-making procedures and weighing trade-offs between different stakeholders who might come into conflict with one another, and just kind of managing that and navigating that, right? Um, so that's kind of primary view that I think a lot of people come to ethics and business ethics with. Now, from what I've already said, you might gather that's not exactly how I teach my class or view ethics. And in fact, I don't actually think that's what ethics is. I think it's part of it. Like, don't get me wrong, it's part of it, but it's not the biggest part or the most fundamental part. And I think here's the problem with thinking about ethics as just following rules and trying to, and decision-making procedures as that it views it as an external constraint. And this is the way you guys already started characterizing it, right? It's seen as something that is outside of us and comes in and says, don't do that, and puts constraints on us. And then we're like, yeah, but I want to do that. Why shouldn't I do that, right? And in some cases, we probably don't do it because we might get caught and can't get away from it. But if we could get away from it, get away with it, sorry, why not do it, right? Like, if anybody ever read any Plato, he talks about the myth of Gyges. And the myth of Gyges, it's kind of like in the myth of Gyges, this character Gyges finds a ring, and it's kind of like a Lord of the Rings magic ring of invisibility. And he puts it on, and he finds that no one can see him; he's invisible. And so he no longer has the threat of punishment. And so what does he do? He goes around and he steals and he kills the king and takes his wife and all the awful things, right? And so the moral question is always like, if you have the power of Gyges, why not be Gyges? Like, what's stopping you, right? And because the external constraints are taken away. And so people tend to think like, hey, yeah, like if there's no external, like ethics is just external constraints, but if I can get away with it, why not, right? We even see, the current president say things like, well, we could win every war if we weren't wokey, which what he means is like if we didn't follow moral norms, it says like don't harm civilians or attack, civilian or whatever, right? He's like, we just used our brute power, we could do whatever we wanted. So, and that raises an interesting philosophical question of like, well, where do these constraints come from, and why should we follow them, especially when we could benefit in some substantial way from not? And it's obviously relevant to business because there's stories on the daily about businesses that do things that are unethical, right? And we tend to think that the ends of business conflict with the ends of morality, right? Morality tells us, deals with this over here, but business, that's about profit. That's about economic growth. That's about expanding. That's about efficiency. And so those things aren't related. And so anytime I tell somebody I teach business ethics, they'll always kind of snicker and be like, oh, business ethics, that's an oxymoron, right? Like without fail, I get this response. And that's how a lot of people think of business. They think it's evil. They think that people that get in it only care about money, or that they're greedy and only motivated by self-interest. And I don't think that's right, but I think that negative view of business is an inevitable result of viewing ethics as an external constraint that comes from somewhere, and we're told you're not supposed to do that. And we're like, but I kind of want to do that. And then if we can do it and get away with it, we do, right? And I think that is even nestled in a larger problem of how we understand what it means to be human, right? So there's kind of like a hierarchy here where it's like our understanding of who we are influences our understanding of ethics, our understanding of the economy, and an understanding of business, right? And so I think what we have to start with looking at is some of the basic assumptions that I think underpins the view of ethics that we were just talking about, and that you kind of were mentioning when I asked what ethics is, right? So here's some of the basic assumptions that underlie our modern attitude towards ethics in business that leads to these issues we were just talking about. One, we think people are inherently selfish or greedy. Inevitably, first day of class, students always say this, and they say it multiple times throughout the semester. Yeah, we're just greedy, we're selfish, we only act out of self-interest. That's just human nature, that's just what we do, right? They say they'll do anything to get ahead, right? And so if other people are going to do it, then I might as well do it too, because why should I get behind if other people are going to do it to get ahead? So Thomas Hobbes, famous philosopher, said that the state of nature is a state of war. And by that, he meant that if society with its rules and laws didn't exist, and we were just to meet someone in the state of nature, in the wild, it would be a state of conflict and tension, and we would be suspicious of them, and it would lead to violence. And so people from that view say, well, hey, if that's how humans are, then the best we can do on an economic level is just channel those warlike forces into something like the market based on supply and demand, and then just let the invisible hand do its job, right? So we see how like our understanding of who we are is influencing our understanding of what the market is or should be, and then ultimately what business is, right? Um, all right. So from that comes a bunch of assumptions about success, right? So in our modern culture, when we think of success, we tend to think of it as financial wealth. Maybe not exclusively, but primarily, right? Like, how do you measure success? Well, if your house is bigger and your car is nicer and you have more money and you go on fancier vacations, right? Like that is a sign of success, right? Why? Well, it shows that you're successful in a competitive arena and that's superior to others in ways that are valued by the market. And additionally, you kind of always need to be gaining more wealth because, well, if you think like at the top, if you think that people are always greedy and trying to get ahead and will do anything, then you got to be wary of them trying to take yours and what you have. And you kind of always need to get more and more because um, while the pie of wealth expands, if you're not expanding your own, it's actually shrinking, right? Because of inflation, because of growth, right? So if you're not constantly getting more, you're actually getting behind. And so what we end up with is a society that is based on constant production, constant consumption in the name of growth. And you kind of never really feel like you have enough, right? Like maybe at some point, but for the most part, people I know, I'm 20 some years older than you guys, and people my age, even those ones who are doing pretty well, never feel like they have enough because it's always like you feel like you need more and more and more. Um, and so you know, this is the view of human beings that influences the way we view the economy and usually the way we view capitalism, right? We might say, hey, okay, this is just the way it has to be, right? Like, yes, we live in a system that leads to wealth inequality. Yes, we live in a system that leads to high levels of unsustainable production and consumption. Yes, we live in a system that sometimes has harsh enforcement of private property laws, but that's the best we can do given the flawed nature of human beings, right? I call it the least shitty of shitty options defense, right? It's like capitalism is the least bad of everything else. And that's why we need to embrace it because of the flawed nature of human beings. That may be a defense of capitalism, but it's not an ethical defense, right? Because notice, it's divorcing ethics from business. Business is just what kind of organizes these selfish impulses into a market, and ethics tries to come in and curtail that. But really, we would rather not have ethics, and we don't really care about it if we don't have to. We might if we own property, like then we might care about like property laws and things like that but if I can take something you have and like get away with it, then and not get punished, then why not, right? So again, the idea that ethics comes from outside ourselves, and because of this, there's always going to be an antagonistic relationship between us and ethics, and also between business and ethics. Okay, that's the modern predicament, right? That's where I think we are. That's where I think you guys. I think that's probably where a lot of your thinking about ethics is framed from. I know that's where a lot of my students, that's kind of their attitude coming into it. Now, I think we sell ourselves short if we take the view that humans are really at bottom self-interested and that we only act out of self-concern, right? I think a little bit of reflection about our lives and the things that are important to us actually, betray that idea. And similarly, I think we sell business short if we view it as only motivated by selfish impulses. I think if we think that way, we misunderstand the purpose of the economy and the purpose of business. Right? And that's kind of what I want to unpack, right? Um, in order to change that view, we have to first change the way we think about ourselves. Because remember what my kind of thesis is here is that the way we think about business and the economy is based on the underlying assumptions we have about who we are and our place in the universe. And so that's kind of what we need to think through. So I approach business ethics differently. Rather than viewing it as an external constraint to prevent us from doing what we'd otherwise naturally want to do. I view business just as a collection of the human beings that constitute it. And if this is the case, then the practice of business needs to be situated in a robust philosophical understanding of what it means to be human, what humans really want, what at bottom we all desire. And I think that is to live meaningful, fulfilling lives, right? Very basic, but I think at bottom, that's what all of us want. And I really think when we think about what leads to the sense of meaning, real deep meaning and fulfillment, it is relationships. It is living for something other than ourselves. It is being part of something bigger than ourselves, right? Whether that's a community or a business or a country or whatever it might be. Um, in philosophy, we call this overarching idea of what makes human life meaningful and fulfilling the good life. And maybe you've heard this term before, the good life. And I think all abstract philosophical questions, I don't care what the philosophical question is or how far away from that idea it seems, I think it can ultimately be traced back to the idea of the good life. And I think that's where ethics comes from, right? Ethics is nothing other than the consideration of the values, virtues, and standards of excellence that are conducive to living a good life, a good human life. All right. So make sense so far? But you guys all feel free to interrupt me at any point and be like, hey, um, can you clarify? Or I was just wondering about something. So don't hesitate, right? But so it's all centered on the good life. And um, so I have this quote here from this philosopher out of Harvard, Michael Sandel. And he says, talking about this idea of the good life, he says, for all our uncertainties about ultimate questions of justice and value in the nature of the good life. So touching upon that idea that like we all seem to have different values and ideas of like what is good or what's not good. He says, the one thing we know is that we live some answer all the time. What do you think that means that we live some answer all the time? Can anybody want to try to say that back to me in a different way? Like what do you hear when you hear that?
Personally, the thing that comes to my mind is I think the reality that you decide is your truth is
Mhm.
is the truth for you. Like if I think that people are inherently bad, then I feel like just generally speaking, I'll have more interactions with, say, bad people. But if the
Yeah.
reality that I choose to believe is, people are inherently good, then that will be my reality as well. It's how
Okay,
I
so your belief, yeah. So your beliefs about the world and how humans are shape your interactions, right? So
I
our
think
beliefs kind
so.
of frame the way we actually engage with others and see the world in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good. Anybody else?
Honestly, the first thing that came to mind reading that was just that everything happens for a reason.
Okay.
Whether you know now or you know later, everything just happens for a reason.
Okay. So everything happens for a reason, and of course, what is that reason? Like we wouldn't necessarily know, right? But he's really kind of emphasizing that the way we live our lives, what we do, what we spend the most of our time thinking about or doing or worrying about reflects our values. And our values indicate what we truly take to be worthwhile, right? So you may be a philosopher or you may not, right? You may have thought of this question for your entire life and written books about it, or you may be thinking about it for the first time and never thought about it before. But the way you are living is implicitly an answer to these abstract questions because you're doing it because you think there's something of value there, right? Your understanding of justice, your understanding of what is valuable or what's really important is reflected in what you do. So if you spend all your time, um, you know, worrying about money, well, that's where that's where your values lie, right? That's and somehow your conception of the good life is tied to that. That's going to be different from somebody who spends their time doing something else. Now, sometimes we might say that we value X, Y, and Z, but then when we really think about it, spend a lot of our time doing the opposite, right? Now there's a conflict between what we say we value or profess to value and the way we're actually living our lives. And for someone like Michael Sandel, he would say, well, the way you're living your life is actually indicative of what you really think, right? Of what you think the good is and what the good life is constitutive of. Um, but already when we take this approach, it kind of shifts ethics from being about something that's external to ourselves to internal, because we see now that the values are coming from within, right? And so this question of the good life is relevant because, you know, everything that we do is an answer to this question. So ethics isn't just like a branch of philosophy or something we do sometimes, its own little discipline. On this understanding, it characterizes the whole of human life because knowingly or unknowingly, we are always living out some answer to these big questions. Okay? Now, if you're someone like Plato, if you've ever read Plato, through the character of Socrates, he says the unexamined life is not worth living. right? And people always say, like, why is that? Why do we have to examine our lives all the time? And it's precisely because of this, because Socrates realizes this. He realizes we are always living out some answer and we all desire to live well. But what happens if we're actually pursuing the wrong things? What happens if we're heading in the wrong direction unknowingly? What if we have been conditioned to think that success and well-being is one thing when in reality it's not? What if our true good doesn't lie in that direction, right? So already when you kind of take this turn, you see that philosophical or ethical questions are not about external constraints, but about enabling the capacities in us to live well. We all have the capacity to live well, to live good lives, but we have to kind of reflect on what that looks like and what kind of life we want to live and what really is worth pursuing and what virtues or excellencies we need to display to do so. Okay, so this leads to a whole bunch of philosophical questions, right? So, all right, so I'm living out some question about the good life all the time. It reflects my values. So, what are values, right? In philosophy, people speculate, like, what are values? Like, I can't look at them. I can't point out and be like, there's a value the way I can be like, here's my phone, right? So, like, where do they come from? What kind of weird entities are they? Do they exist at all? If they don't exist, why do we spend so much time thinking about them and pursuing them? So what are they? Where do they come from? How do we express our values in the world? And as we already kind of touched upon, are there values that are objectively higher or superior to others? Values that we could all share and agree upon? And if so, how would we even begin to determine that? All right, so I'm going to kind of propose a way that, Odysseus, you might remember this from the ethics class. I'm going to go back 2,300 years to Aristotle, because I think he gives us the best framework for thinking about that through this idea of eudaimonia. So to get to at this idea, let me ask any of you who just it's going to seem like a silly question, but I'll just go with it. Why are you at this? Why are you attending this Zoom meeting? Like, what are you trying? What is the purpose of being here? And I'm not looking for anything deep. Again, just like whatever. You can be honest and whatever pops into your mind.
Here to learn something new.
Okay. Learn something new, Oscar. Why do you want to learn something new?
It's interesting.
Okay, so it's interesting, and so why why do you want to learn things that are interesting?
It's a fun way to spend my time.
Good. It's pleasurable. There's
Mm,
something good about developing a sense of wonder and inquisitiveness and learning new things, right? So when I do this in my ethics class, I'll say, "Why are you in this classroom?" Right? And the question or the answer is always because I have to take this class and it fit in my schedule, right? That's the answer. And it's like, well, why do you care about taking this class? Well, because I want to graduate. Why do you want to graduate, right? Well, because I want to get a job. Why do you want to get a job? Well, because like a little kid, right? Why do you want to get a job? Because I want to make some money. Okay, why do you want to make money? Because I want to have my own house. Why do you want your own house? Because I want to be independent. Why do you want to be independent? I want to have a family. Why do you want to have a family? And it goes and goes until finally they just say because it's enjoyable or it makes me happy or I think it's going to make me happy, right? So this is the Aristotle's approach 2,300 years ago. Aristotle said, what if there is a hierarchy of values, right? What if there's like some that are higher than others? And ultimately, um, there would be a highest value. And he thought there was probably two reasons we should think that there would be. One, you can't make any decision if you don't have a hierarchy of values, because if you're faced with a choice and everything is of equal value, you would have no basis for deciding one thing over the other. So anytime you choose to go to college as opposed to not, to accept this job as opposed to not, to whatever it might be, to stay at home with your aging grandparent rather than going on a vacation, whatever it might be, there's values that come into play, and they're what kind of guide your decision, right? And so we have to have some hierarchy of values to make any decision. Now, Aristotle says, well, some are going to be higher than others. And ultimately, it seems like there should be a highest one, a highest good, he called it. Because if there isn't, then desire would just be kind of futile, right? Because we seek things thinking that once we get them, we will have some degree of fulfillment. But if there was no end to this process, then desire would just keep going and keep spinning, right? And so all our attempts to actually live, really fulfilled lives would probably end up failing because desire would never be satiated. We would never be truly happy. right? And so Aristotle does like a thought process like this, and he ends up with happiness. He says, well, actually, the word is eudaimonia. It's translated as happiness often. And it kind of makes sense, right? Because if someone says, why do you want to be happy? It's like, what are you going to say? You're like, it's just a good state of being. It's intrinsically valuable, right? Um, I don't like the translation happiness low because as modern people, we tend to think of happiness as like the immediate satisfaction of a want. Like it's like, oh, I got the car I always wanted, now I'm happy. And then 3 months later, we're bored of that car, and it's like I'm not happy anymore. But Aristotle is looking at something more robust than that. It actually flourishing is a better translation because when we talk about flourishing, what we're talking about is living like a really robust, beautiful human life in all aspects of human life, right? Um, Being excellent in all areas of life. And that's what eudaimonia means. I just like to leave the word eudaimonia because it's kind of strange and nice sounding. But it's something like what we're all after, the state of just flourishing, of living well. And that doesn't mean that everything goes right for you. There could be suffering, there could be tragedy in your life, but it's the way you approach those and deal with those and handle those that determine whether you are flourishing or not, whether you being eudaimon in that moment or not. All right. So all right, so that's kind of the Aristotelian approach, and I think that is a good approach because it forces us to think about our values and what we're after, and think about things that are maybe intrinsically valuable. Like Oscar, you said, like being inquisitive just seems like it's good for us as human beings. Like there's something not for anything else behind it, but just like it's kind of good qua human to be inquisitive or have this sense of wonder. And so that's what Aristotle is after. Whereas there are things that are instrumentally good, which is, things that I can use a hammer. A hammer is instrumentally good because I can use it to make something, but I wouldn't say it's intrinsically good. You know, if I don't hold a hammer and be like I have everything I need, right? So I want to think about where we tap into meaning and value in our life. So I would like maybe if you already have some, or just throw out a few things that are like really kind of valuable to you. Maybe you can make a list of like a 6, 7, 8 values of things that kind of stand out to you as being choice worthy and important in your life. So any values that kind of pop into your head is kind of important to you.
Family.
Family.
My peace.
What was the second one?
My peace.
Peace. Okay. So peace and like a sense of like contentment,
Yeah.
fulfillment. Okay. Good. So family, peace, a sense of peace,
I'd say integrity.
integrity. And what about integrity? Why does that one pop into your mind? What do you think is important about integrity?
Breaking it down to something as simple as someone's word. I was
Okay.
very much so raised with the mindset of don't break a promise.
Okay, integrity and trust, very important. Okay, very important values. Yeah. What else? Okay.
My
You can throw out
health.
more than one too, but
My health.
health. So physical and mental health. Okay.
Having stability.
Stability. So are you talking about like financial stability or like
Yeah.
financial stability? Okay. So money, finance. What else?
I would say faith slash belief.
Okay. So
That
fate/belief. Can you say a little bit more, unpack that a little bit more of like what you mean by fate?
yeah. For me, faith is like,
Oh, fate. Sorry, fate. Yeah.
yeah, faith in the sense that like believing that, the future is good or having hope for, a good outcome.
Okay, so faith, that kind of trust in a good outcome. Do you think this for you, does that require some kind of belief in some higher power, something guiding that process to have that kind of faith? Is that what you're talking about, or just
I mean,
not even have to be that robust?
personally, I do believe in some sort of higher power that guides you, but I think just I mean, you could replace that with optimism and then
Okay.
take the higher power out of the equation.
Okay, so it's important to have you value optimism, and you value optimism because you need that to keep going through difficult times, or faith to kind of keep you going through struggles.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
if I feel like things are always gonna, turn out bad, I wouldn't do it.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, good. So you have to have some belief that the future will be better than the present. What else?
Love.
Love? Okay, good. So we got like family, love. With that, can we maybe say community? People put
Yeah.
being part of a community. Yeah.
Yeah.
Certainly we have to be, if we're talking about love, we have to have relationships, right? So family, love,
Relationships,
yeah, relationships, friendship, very
friendships.
important one. I don't think many of us would consider our lives to be going well if we had no friends,
Yeah.
right? Okay. What else? I can put inquisitiveness down,
Ooh, I would say curiosity.
curiosity. Why curiosity? Who said that?
That was me.
Oh yeah. Well, why curiosity?
It opens way more doors than you think, in my opinion.
Okay. So for opportunities, just by being inquisitive, like might lead down a path you don't expect. Something like
Yeah, putting yourself in a position where you question the status quo. I think it couples very nicely with intelligence. You can
that.
surprise yourself, you could surprise others around you.
Okay, so we can put intelligence down too. Curiosity, being inquisitive, and intelligence all kind of go together.
Questions. Yeah.
Cool. Got some questions.
Generosity.
What was that last one?
Generosity, so giving back.
Generosity. Okay. Yep. Why is generosity an important value to you?
I think once you fulfilled your own needs enough, then maybe you can feel that you're ready to give back to other people and uplift the people around you and make their lives better as well.
Okay. So giving back to others fills you with a sense of purpose, right?
Yeah.
Being part of other people's lives and giving back in meaningful ways, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Any others? No, justice, fairness, anybody?
Those are
Freedom. There's a lot, right? I mean, we could go for
Yeah.
a while, right?
Yeah.
Creativity. There's a lot of things that we value. And so, like, if we had more time, a good kind of exercise is to make like a list of 10 values that you think are most important, and then kind of narrow those down to like three, one, two, or three, right? To see like what is really, and when you think about it, you might be surprised even what you end up putting at the top, right? So only one of these had anything to do with like money or, financial stability. And the question might be, okay, so how much financial stability do you need? How much money do you need to feel financially stable? As I said, in our kind of economy, you always feel like you need more and more and more. But these other things aren't directly tied to that. And these are the things that kind of give us our sense of purpose and meaning. Now, I can guarantee you that if I did this with people from different cultures, part of the world, I would get a very similar list, right? A few things might be emphasized differently, some might come sooner than others, but I promise you that in all my times doing this, these are the things that keep coming up. So going back to earlier when we were talking about, well, how do we get agreement? How do we find values that we all share? You talk to people about what they really care about. Like you ask them, you say like, what do you value and why? And if you just have that real conversation and you can get away from all like the political noise and cultural baggage that, is thrown at us, like you find that people actually are pretty similar in the things that they really matter. Family structure might be different in different cultures and different societies. The way they think about faith or, community and that structure might be a little bit different, but it's still going to be important to them. Right. And so I think that's important, right? And what I want to emphasize is that when we start with this way and we start thinking about ethics in this way, what we realize is that these values, like where do they come from? They come from our experience of being human and living human lives and associating with people and realizing like what makes us truly happy or flourishing, right? In the sense Aristotle would say, right? Aristotle thinks that things that are intrinsically good draw us to them. Our understanding of them will be imperfect, but we have some vague intimation that there is some good there that we're trying to realize more clearly. Let me give you an example to help might make this clear. So I don't know if anybody here is musically, I am not musically talented, but I think this is a good example. If you're a singer and you're singing a new song for the first time and you're trying to get the right note, right? The right pitch and everything for this lyric. Now, in some sense, you don't know what the right note is because you've never done it before. In another sense, you have to have some vague idea of what you're looking for, or you would never know when you're getting closer or that you don't have it. So you experiment and you try it in different ways, and eventually you hit it. And when you hit it, you see it, and you realize that goodness that you kind of were vaguely aware of and searching for, and then you finally hit on, right? Another, I think, good example is jazz music. So again, I'm not musical, but musical examples are really good. So a jazz musician doesn't play a song simply to finish it or to produce a physical artifact, right? The point of playing jazz is the activity, the unfolding experience of improvising, right? And so a beginner in jazz music, when they start listening to or playing jazz, they have some appreciation for what's good about it, but it's not well developed, right? They might not know the difference between somebody and playing in the corner of the coffee shop and Miles Davis, right? Like they don't really know the difference, but they know they like jazz and there's something good at it, right? They have no idea what the good in jazz is, but by repeatedly engaging with jazz music, listening to it, learning to play it, jamming with others, studying the blues, their understanding of musical possibilities change, right? And over the course of that time, they come to realize um, the good in the activity of playing jazz music. It's not good for anything else but the activity itself. It's intrinsically valuable or pleasurable. It leads to kind of happiness, right? It's a type of excellence that we can realize. I think the same thing is true of life in general, the good life, right? We start out our lives with without a perfect crystal clear vision of what the good life is. We don't know, right? And through living our lives, we discover that things like friendship and justice and love and community are all things that are important to us. And some financial stability is important too, right? And by practicing them over and over again, we come to better understand the goodness in the same way that the jazz player uncovers new creative depths by staying attuned to the music, right? Human beings discover what is truly good by continuously refocusing our attention on our experience, our relationships, and our moral choices, which is why Socrates says the unexamined life is not worth living. Because if you're not doing this, you're not going to be experiencing as rich of a goodness in life as you could be. So you're losing out. So this is what I'm talking about. It's like it's internal, right? It's like I want to live well. How do I do that? What standards do I need to live up to? What virtues do I need to practice and cultivate in order to do that? Right. I don't. I assume that no one in here is probably a parent yet. Are there any parents in this group yet? Okay. So I have 3 kids, and I always tell people, I'm like, if I were to describe to you my day-to-day life with 3 kids, right? You'd be like, why? Why do you do it? Right? Because like if you come from a culture that values autonomy and individual freedom and independence, and then I'm like, yeah, so I can't do this and I can't do that, and I have to run them here and do this, and you're gonna be like, okay, I don't understand why anyone would become a parent, and yet we keep doing it, right? Why? I do think there's some intrinsic value to that activity that we recognize that draws us to it, and through the course of a lifetime of parenting, you come to more and more realize that goodness. And so someone who's been parenting for 20 years will have a much more robust understanding of that goodness than someone who's been doing it for one day. Um, but this is, again, it's kind of an intrinsically valuable activity. All right. So again, to kind of in summation, what happens when we start taking this approach is that ethics no longer is seen just as a set of rules or procedures that's outside of us and that we begrudgingly have to follow or perhaps choose not to follow. Rather, it's careful considerations of the sources of deep meaning and value in our lives. Any standards, rules, or limits that come from such considerations will no longer be viewed as external, but things that come from within and lead us to be more excellent people and live better lives and ultimately become eudaimon, right? And the same thing goes with businesses, right? So if business just is the human beings that engage in it, and if business is a human activity, like all human activities aims at eudaimonia, flourishing, the good life, then ethics will be internal to business too. It would be the exact same thing, right? Ethical business will just be a form of human activity in harmony with the conditions necessary for collective well-being, rather than it's something that I have to do because I have to for whatever reason I might not even know, right? It's something that'll make us individually feel more alive, more purposeful, but also contribute to the common good in ways that would not if we were focused more on ourselves, right? So let's see. Wow, time went fast. Okay, I'll just open it up here because I thought I had like 20 more minutes still at least. So, um, Yeah. So we can think about how business fits in the goal of being eudaimon, but I'd love to hear any thoughts or questions you have. I'll stop now if you have them.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Um, so sort of looking at like the I don't know, your main like thesis for the presentation, are you saying that um like the way ethics fits into business, if we take this new viewpoint of like, humans, like what are we as individuals? Are we inherently good, inherently bad? So are you like, is this view that like ethics is like an important part in business, like contingent on, I don't know, viewing like, let's say like gratitude or giving back to others as
Yeah.
like an aspect of flourishing, like eudaimonia?
Yeah. So I think you have to situate so business isn't so that for you it's not just an isolated activity that I do my business and then there's the rest of my life. I think the problem with our modern society is that everything is fragmented and nothing really seems connected, and we just kind of do this and everything has its place, but there's no overarching kind of vision of the good life to unite everything. And I think business, properly understood, needs to be situated within that kind of reflection on the good life and it's what it means to be human. And I think when we do that, we realize that our own individual good is tied to the good of others. And so business is just one way, a big way of fulfilling that desire to be part of something bigger than yourself, to give to others, right? Because I mean, if you think about, so my question here is like, if every business disappeared tomorrow, what would we lose, right? And we lose a lot of things. Like I wouldn't be able to eat because I don't know how to grow my own food particularly well, and I can't build. I'm not a very good carpenter or things like that. So business is providing necessary services that we all need to flourish and do well, right? And we need to situate that activity within an understanding of how that business activity fits in our overall project of being a human being. Because like all activity, we're aiming for the good. And so business has to fit into that in some way as well, right? And so if you just pursue business and your focus becomes money, profit, that becomes like that what comes to dominate your value hierarchy. I think there's a good chance that you're going to be left feeling impoverished, and you're probably going to feel disconnected from your community at large. Whereas if you go into business saying like, all right, as a human being, what skills and talents do I have? How can I give back? How can I engage those activities in a business that is going to promote the common good and promote human well-being? I think you're going to find that much more fulfilling and purposeful. And of course, there'll be financial considerations like how do I run this business and keep it afloat and everything. But you see how like what's driving your business is the purpose of business is no longer growth, profit. It's meaning, purpose, value, and thinking about where those things come from as a human being and how they fit into the whole of your life.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think intuitively it definitely speaks to my intuition. It's hard to say like, could you like explicitly justify like that viewpoint? But I like kind of I like obviously my gut sort of agrees with what you're saying, but yeah.
yeah, so when you say explicitly justify the viewpoint, what would that like? What do you mean? What would you need to justify? What kind of evidence would you be looking for?
I don't know. I feel like isn't it just kind of hard to like say because obviously like business is like rooted in financials and money and profit. So like when you start a business, you could argue like I'm doing it for the community or for the greatest good, but I feel like you could also like argue like a different viewpoint of like you're finding a niche in which to open up your business because your greater end goal is to make business money,
Mhm. Yeah,
like it's sort of like tied together. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, someone could say that. Many people do say that, right? And I think this is why the consideration of virtue in the good life and real kind of serious consideration, why we have to come back to that, right? Because in a way, it's not about me providing an argument that says, "Oh, see, you really do have to do that. You really shouldn't be so solely focused on money, or whatever." But it's you kind of realizing internally that as a human being, maybe that's not where your true good lies, right? Not that doesn't mean making money is bad, but what is the purpose of the economy? Well, economy facilitates exchange so that we have access to things we otherwise wouldn't have, so we can live better, right? And so the economy promotes the common good, or at least it should. And so when wealth is produced, wealth is in service of the common good. Now, when everyone starts competing for that pie that is supposed to compete or supposed to enhance the well-being of people in a society, and then you start having dramatic wealth and income inequality, wealth inequality, now you start running into a problem, right? Because now we start thinking of like, oh, well, you made this much money, you made $100 million because you had an idea and people wanted it. It might have been an idea that really helped people. It might have been like some stupid little toy that breaks after 10 days, but everyone wanted to buy it, right? It could be a number of different reasons, right? And so, um, where was I going with this? So the point is that you want to always kind of situate that what you're doing back into your desire to live a good human life. And so ethics, again, so it comes from within. And this is what Aristotle wants to emphasize. It's about character. It's about asking, who do I want to be? What kind of life do I want to live? And ultimately, the evidence comes from dissatisfaction. The sense of, I'm making good money, but I don't really feel like I have a lot of meaning or purpose in my life. Like there's got to be something more than this, right? And then you start looking, well, what else is there, right? Or what can I do with my money that maybe isn't so focused on me but helps others or something like that. I think that's, and so I think that's, you can't convince someone through an argument to be ethical. But when you start talking about values and what it means to be human and how we want to live, it kind of changes the conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody? Yeah, Oscar.
I know we're running short on time, so I want to be respectful of that. But you're saying that business and ethics are more tied together than we would think.
Yeah.
And maybe this is because I'm an economics major, and it's made me think in more like econ terms now.
Yeah.
But uh, do you think it's possible for a business to, like, how does a business decide what is the correct balance of their business goal of profitability as well as being ethical? I think, like, from a very simple like thinking, I would think that when you're first starting out as a business, you have to focus on profitability first. And then as you become bigger and you're able to compete with other people who are already established in the market, then to differentiate yourself, you can focus on the ethical and then making your business more efficient in that way. And then,
Yes. Okay.
oh, and then one last thing is I'll like add a slightly, I like agree with what Solomon's saying, but I'm under the belief that businesses like what a business has to do is create value. So like if they cannot create value, then whether perceived or real, then they won't be able to reach their goal. So just like sharing like how I think, so maybe you can like better understand my like question. And yeah, just like
Yeah,
curious your thoughts on that.
elaborate when you say create value, what are we talking about when we talk about create value?
Uh yeah, so like you said, right? Like we're not farmers, we don't know how to grow food. So a grocery store creates value by bringing together a lot of different farmers and connecting them to people of other professions so they can get food easily. Like yeah, like being like a, even whether you're a middleman, you're a direct producer, or maybe even you're a consultant and people perceive value in your advice. So
Yeah.
no.
I mean, I think the example you gave was great because you're talking about, if you're talking about providing food for people, that's serving the common good. Like people need to eat, right? And people wouldn't necessarily be able to do that themselves, or it'd be very difficult and life might be harder. And so someone figures out a way to produce food. I mean, agricultural revolution is what happens, right? We were able to produce food and distribute it more equal or efficiently. And so you're creating social value there and you're receiving some monetary compensation in return, right? But even there, the purpose of your business in that example is not to make as much money as possible. The purpose of the business is to provide social value. This is this is increasing collective flourishing. And of course, you need to be sufficient as a business. You need to be able to pay people. You need to be able to pay yourself. You need to be able to cover your expenses and all that. Also, all those things are relevant. But the purpose of business, kind of against, Milton Friedman here, would not be to maximize profits. It would be to ask yourself, okay, what can I do? What skills do I have to contribute to the common good in some way, right? Then you have to figure out how to make that sustainable. Yeah.
Oh, one additional point. So in that case, for the groceries, if if they were just like if there was like only like Walmart, for instance, and they were the only ones selling vegetables, then they could just like price gouge and charge like super expensive. But
Yeah.
because like other businesses exist and they want to make money, do you think it's okay for a society to conduct ethical business for like those selfish reasons? Like it's not because they want to conduct like they want to like be able to sell it for that cheap, but it's because they have to, which is a good thing. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, so I think what you're doing there is you're actually giving an ethical justification for competition, right? The kind
Mm,
of free market idea is that through increased competition, it actually ends up being beneficial to consumers, right? Cheaper products, ideally better products, although it seems like at some point that might not always be the case. Certainly things aren't made as well as they used to be 40, 50 years ago. But anyway, yeah. So I think like even there, you're already kind of giving an ethical argument for to justify competition. And the idea is that it's actually it's improving the common good. It's promoting flourishing in some way because rather than a monopoly price gouging us, which is bad for people, and that's not going to lead to a good society, you have competition and you have lower prices. And so you're already thinking ethically. And so
mm,
competition can be justified in that way. And I think the reason people get into something like that would be not, I mean, there's two reasons you can get into a business venture. One, it might be like, because I want to get really rich and I think this is the way to do it, in which case you could end up doing, if you have any idea, you can end up doing that and because your focus is money. Or it could be like, I think this is my way of giving back and I think I can do this a little bit better than this other company or these three companies. And that's ultimately going to be better for consumers and I'm going to be able to make a living off of it and I'm contributing in some way. But it's more of like, what is the end goal, right? What is at the top of your value hierarchy? And when people think business, they think profit. And I think that leads to a lot of the issues that we see in business today. Whereas if you put eudaimonia up there and you think about it more holistically in terms of like human life as a whole, all of a sudden it's more of like, no, what are my gifts and what do I have to give? And, yes, I have to make a living, but now again, as I mentioned at the beginning, we live in a society that forces us to constantly keep getting more and more and more as well. So there are systemic problems there, I think, as well. But I think to address your point, I think that is ethical. I think, or you can make an ethical justification for it. Did I address what you were asking?
yeah, I think I have a better wrap around it. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Anybody? Yeah. Anybody else? Other questions? I know if I don't have, I can go a little longer if you guys can, but if you have to go, I understand that too. But happy to entertain any questions you would have. Decius, you look like you're close to asking a question.
I'm just like, I'm just trying to think of it in my own context.
Yeah.
To me, business is, or at least business with the goal of eudaimonia or like achieving happiness would be something that is beneficial for everyone. And that's kind of something that's been bouncing off of like in my head for well, honestly, since your class is it's not just about helping myself make the most money possible, but I also am starting to think of it as like, how can I genuinely make a positive impact in someone's life and not just sort of like rip them off to get the highest price I can? And then how can I also then consider Mother Earth in this equation, which is often
Yeah.
overlooked? Because that was the big, like that was the big thing that I walked away from with in your class, which kind of honestly like scares me a little bit, is like we are, I don't know, I feel like we're just, no one's really internalizing how big of an issue this is. And to me, it's like no matter how much good I could do, I just feel like this overarching issue is so out of my control. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Kind
Yeah,
of
thanks for kind of asking that question the way you did. So I think important thing to emphasize is that for someone like Aristotle, he says we are inherently social creatures. We are not born isolated individuals. We are born in communities. We are shaped by those communities. Our identities are formed in those communities. And so relationships are foundational to our sense of who we are and our sense of, again, meaning and purpose and things like that. So we always kind of pit what we want for ourselves versus what we owe to others. Whereas someone like Aristotle or people who work in this field of virtue ethics, which is what Aristotle kind of his approach to ethics is called, they say that look, our individual good is tied to the good of others, right? Like one cannot be truly happy, they would argue, in isolation from others, not contributing to the well-being of others, knowing that others are suffering so that you can benefit or have all the things that you want, right? Our good is tied to the good of others. Those things are aligned. And so real meaning and purpose comes from strong social bonds and forming and maintaining. And so any system has to strengthen those bonds if it's going to be conducive to eudaimonia rather than fracture them, right? And I would say that the system we live in at times has strengthened and at times is fracturing those bonds, right? I know when you first kind of pitched this idea of this group to me, you were just saying like there's a lot of young people in business who kind of maybe, they need to come together and have this sense of community and they kind of can feel lost or isolated once they get out there in the world and you're just working and, whatnot. And the focus maybe becomes on money or things like that. And, that is kind of our cultural moment. And it's the cultural moment that a lot of young men are experiencing this sense of isolation, of maybe doing well financially, but not feeling like they have a lot of purpose in their lives, right? Because we have been told you're going to find purpose in a career and you're going to find meaning and purpose in financial success. And then you get it, and it's like, yeah, it's nice, but is that it? Right. And so, from what I understand, like that's even where this kind of group maybe has some of its origins. And so it already you're recognizing like we are social beings and we need that kind of community and friendship and to situate our existence within the context of something bigger than ourselves, right? And you don't even have to talk about, that doesn't mean religion or God necessarily, although it could, but it could just mean the community within which you live. And now when you talk about the economic problem, it's the same thing, right? We can talk about relationships with other humans, but I use it broadly. So there's also ecological, environmental relationships. We can have a relationship with nature. I remember we went outside and we talked about gratitude and it was freezing and you had a t-shirt on and you were shivering for the 2 hours of class. And that's what we were getting at, right? It's like we are also cut off in many ways because we live, despite having technology that connects us more than ever before, we feel in a way more isolated than ever before, right? Something about these bonds, these social bonds are fracturing, and we feel it with other people, and we also feel it with the environment, right? And it's like some people just love to get into nature and it rejuvenates them because there is a real relationship. And so the point when we were discussing that in class was unless we come to see the good in nature and value it for itself rather than what we can use it for to make things and consume, right? Unless we have that inner transformation first, all the green technology and whatever you come up with isn't going to solve the problem because we're just going to reproduce the pattern of exploitation somewhere else, right? Because we don't actually have respect for it. So if you don't have respect for others, it could lead to exploitation. If you don't have respect for nature, it could lead to exploitation, right? And the whole time we're told, no, we have to keep producing, we have to keep consuming because that's how we keep the economy growing. And we have to keep the economy growing because that's how We need that for jobs, and it just perpetuates, right? And so we need to keep innovating, and then we innovate new technologies, and they lead to different problems, and they put different people out of work, and then just keep cycling, right? Um, and so there's lots of things we could say about that. There's a question of how long can that cycle continue? Um, but I think ultimately, if you're talking about the environmental crisis, I think if you just focus on environmental issues without developing that relationship, you're gonna become anxious, and you're going to become maybe despondent. You're gonna say, well, what can we do, right? But when you enter into like think about a parent, right, or someone you really care about, you wouldn't be like, well, I don't know what to do. Sorry, I can't. You're there for them, right? You support them no matter what.
Yeah.
That can be true with anything, right? Start locally. Don't think you have to solve these problems on a huge scale. First, it starts with you and resituating your own activity and your own purpose in business, right? And then, your household and the block that you live on, and then the community, right? And then all those interactions. First of all, it'll sustain you. It'll fill you with hope because you're going to be in meaningful relationships, and that's like what life's about. And second, you're going to discover that there's a lot more people doing things, and there's a lot more possibilities than we think there are when we sit and we watch 24-hour news cycles or clips or reels that makes us anxious and stressed out, right? So I think that's kind of the way I framed it in class, and that's how I would. It all comes back to the same thing, whether we're talking about human relationships or environmental relationships. It's all about this kind of inner work first, I believe.
That's very true, actually. And I don't know if this relates, but now I've noticed, whenever I see a piece of trash on the floor, I remember when I would grow up, or even, until recently, I would see it, I wouldn't think twice about it, and then I'd turn and then keep walking. Now, I guess I look at it, and with a little more care and concern, I will sometimes I'll pick it up and I'll put it in my pocket, and then I'll keep going to find a trash can.
Mhm.
And I understand, like, at the end of the day, it's not necessarily that individual act that's going to solve this crisis, but I think it's just having the care of, like, taking the time out of your day to intentionally go pick that seemingly insignificant piece of trash from the floor.
Yeah.
Is
And
that what you're getting at?
that's absolutely part of it. I mean, that's small acts to big acts, right? Like I wouldn't discount any of them. And yes, like we were always looking for like that one swift thing we can do to change the world. But again, if we don't first change ourselves and our attitudes, whatever new tech that we come up with to solve the one problem it's going to reappear in another way, right? And so, because if someone has that attitude, they're not going to throw that paper in the first place, right? And the reason now it pains you when you see that and you feel like doing something as before is because you've come to see some deeper underlying good or value in the world or in the environment that maybe you weren't as perceptive to when you were younger, right? And so you've kind of seen that in light of the larger picture of being human and various relationships. And so that's kind of getting back to the jazz musician example, right? You're learning to see something that was always there, but you couldn't see. And now you've expanded your perception, right? Another example I like to use, if you ever go to a art museum and they're showing you a painting from like 800 years ago, and you're like, I don't get it. It looks nice, I guess. I couldn't make it, but like I don't get what the big deal is. And then you take a guided tour and someone explains to you the craft behind it and all the how this painting was unique because of the technique they use and the strokes and all this. And you're like, oh wow, like there was actually a lot more there than I realized. And you develop this greater aesthetic appreciation for it. You are seeing something more than what you could prior to that tour, right? You are deepening your your appreciation for the aesthetic beauty of what is in front of you. It's the same thing in front of you the whole time, but you could only see a limited portion at first, and now you can see much more. And that's kind of the way it works with ethics, actually. Because Socrates famously said, to know the good is to do the good. And that's kind of what he meant was that we're by nature drawn to goodness. And when we recognize it and truly understand it and know it, we almost can't do differently because now our good aligns with it. So it's not this, oh, I want to do this, but I'm supposed to do that. It's like, no, like this is what fills me up, type thing. So
That's
it's less this external constraint. Yeah.
I like that. Yeah, I can agree with that.
Yeah. I mean, so that's just kind of the framework, right? This is a very general framework. This is like the very beginning of how I introduce it actually when I teach the class, right? This is kind of things we touch on. And then we go from there and it deepens and deepens and deepens. And so there's a lot more we could say about it, but I think this is, I think, and I think it's really relatively recent in history that business has been really so drastically detached from these larger ethical considerations of the good life. If you go back 1,000 years, probably even 700 years, people wouldn't have thought of it the way we do today. So that's kind of my pitch.
Okay, can I ask the group now, did you guys find value in this? Like, did this change your guys' perspective of like, because I don't know, this totally shifted my world personally. Um, did you guys derive any value from this?
Okay, if not.
I'd say absolutely, and it kind of ties to one of
Yeah.
those values I listed earlier. Um, I mentioned curiosity.
Mhm.
This is the kind of discussion that sparks that curiosity. It makes you start to question. It makes you start to ask. I bet you when I go to work tomorrow, something differently is going to think. Some thought is going to trigger in my brain that I wouldn't have thought about if it wasn't for this conversation. It could be the smallest thing. It could be super like a 3 second thought. But that's something that wouldn't have happened tomorrow if I didn't have this discussion or attend this meeting today. And that's how it starts, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Plato says philosophy begins in wonder, and wonder generates more wonder because it's a vast world and you're never going to have it all solved or figured out and it's always going to surprise you, so that wonder keeps growing and deepening. And Socrates is the figure of the philosopher, is the person who's always kind of mocked because he's in wonder about everything and he's staring up at the stars and the moon. Everyone else is like busy trying to do their work and like do their tasks, make their money or whatever it might be, and Socrates is just kind of walking around barefoot drinking wine and looking up at the moon, asking these ridiculous questions. And people are like, but also he seems a little bit more alive than everyone as well, and certainly more joyful. So yeah.
Yeah, well said from Anthony. I agree.
Good. Good. I mean, that's really the point when I do these, is not to provide solutions. I don't have all the solutions. I don't have all the answers, but a framework to start thinking through things, because and to kind of challenge the predominant cultural narrative that frames a lot of our thinking, right? We don't even realize the way we think about problems is framed by our economic and social and political structures, and there are possibilities that we can't even see because we're just very narrowly focused. And so, yeah, I hope that in some way it stirs a thought that you maybe wouldn't have had before.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nordin.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah, guys. Well,
All
thank
right.
you all for coming. And thank you, Professor. I mean, this was incredible. And yeah, we'll be in touch, guys.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Nice meeting you all.
Take care.
Super, super cool meeting. Thank you so much for your time.